Bye! This is a lesson for the literature component, Dear Mr. Kilmer, by Anne Schraff. In this video, you are going to learn the summary of all the chapters in the novel, and important events are mentioned in each chapter. Chapter 1. Richard went hunting with his father, Pa Knight, and his brother, Gus Knight. Richard purposely missed when he was shooting the buck, because he didn't like killing animals for fun. Pa told Richard that he didn't need to go hunting anymore if he didn't feel like it. That night after supper, Richard helped his sister Angie with the chores. He went upstairs to his room and he wrote a poem. He kept his collection of poems a secret. Buck. A buck is a male deer or antelope. Chapter 2. Mrs Hansen began her English class by reading a poem titled Trees that was written by Mr. Joyce Kilmer. One of the class bullies, Abner, tried insulting Mr. Kilmer, but Mrs. Hansen was quick to read out the article from the New York Times that Mr. Kilmer was joining the army. Richard had found a new hero. He quickly jotted down the address of the editor's office of the New York Times. Richard saw Hannah Schirmer was crying alone and noticed that Hannah Schirmer's book cover had the word Dirty Hunt sprawled all over it. He wondered who would do such a mean thing to a nice girl like Hannah. Richard defended Hannah and her family in a discussion with Abner, Harry, and Blanche. After Richard got home and quickly finished his chores, he wrote a letter to Mr. Kilmer. In the letter, he mentioned that he wrote his own poetry, but he kept it a secret from everyone. What is the meaning of sprawl? Sprawl means to spread out over a large area in an untidy or irregular ways. And hunt? Hunt is a word used in the First World War which cemented the popular term for Germans. Chapter 3. Mrs. Hansen entered the class and told the class that the tavern owned by Hannah Schirmer's family had been vandalized and terrible things were painted on the walls. She brought a card for the whole class to sign. Many of the students refused to sign the card. They started insulting Hannah. Mrs. Hansen got upset at their remarks. Richard ended up being the only student in the entire class to sign the card. After class, Richard went to Mrs. Hansen and asked if he could deliver the card to the Schirmers by himself. Mrs. Hansen smiled and gave him the card. On the way, Richard was confronted by the bullies, Harry and Abner. After they tried to fight him, Richard defended himself and scared the bullies away. Hannah reluctantly took the card from Richard when he mentioned that it might mean something to her parents. When Richard reached his home, Angie told Richard that he had received a letter from New York. Tavern. Tavern is a pub or an inn, and tavern serves food and drinks. Chapter 4. Richard opened a letter from Mr. Kilmer and read it. Mr. Kilmer told Richard to not be afraid and share his poems. At dinner, Richard told his family about the letter. His family didn't react enthusiastically. Angie wouldn't understand his poems. Gus and Pa said that he would grow out of the face. At school, Richard went to see Mrs. Hansen to show her the letter and some of his poems. Together, they picked a poem to send to Mr. Kilmer. After Richard left the school building, Hannah came up to him to apologize and thank him for the card. On the way home, Richard saw the train full of soldiers in khaki uniforms. He wondered how they could possibly be smiling at a time like this. Grow out of. Grow out of means to stop having an interest in something or stop doing something. Khaki uniform, dark yellowish green cloth often worn by soldiers. Chapter 5. Mrs. Hansen announced that Richard was going to read the letters he received from Mr. Kilmer. Some of the boys started insulting Richard. Richard read the letter out loud and read out the poem he had just written in honor of the soldiers going to war. Hannah gave a suggestion to make the last line of the poem sound better. Richard complimented Hannah's suggestion. That night, Richard wrote a reply to Mr. Kilmer. Over the summer, Richard worked hard on the farm with Pa. One night, Richard even wrote a poem about his father. He received a letter back from Mr. Kilmer. He was very happy that Mr. Kilmer had complimented Hannah. However, he was too shy to go see her. Hannah was always in Richard's thoughts. Chapter 6. Richard and Mr. Kilmer exchanged letters throughout the summer. Richard always attached a poem with each letter he sent. Mr. Kilmer sent a letter saying that he had arrived in France and was getting ready to join the battle. Richard was worried about the war. The fighting seemed far from over, and he worried if his brother or even himself would go fight in the war someday. He thought of his uncle's death and how his father was deeply affected by it. When school started, Mrs. Hansen announced that the class would put on a program to help give funds for the war and sell Liberty bonds. What are Liberty bonds? Liberty bonds are war bonds that were sold in the United States to support the Allied cause in the World War I. Subscribing to the bonds became a symbol of patriotic duty in the United States and introduced the idea of financial securities to many citizens for the first time. Still in Chapter 6, a girl student would be chosen to play Lady Liberty and one student would be chosen to play the doughboy, an American soldier. Both students would be chosen by writing the best essays about the topic how we can help the war efforts right here in Turtle Lake. Richard started thinking and had an idea. All the students would write letters to the soldiers fighting overseas. It would help them not to feel lonely and homesick. He started writing his essay. Two mean girls, Peggy and Blanche, discussed who would be chosen as Lady Liberty. They made fun of their classmates Millie for being so mousy and Hannah for being a hunt. Richard was shocked at their comments. Lady Liberty. The statue of Lady Liberty stands in the Upper New York Bay, a universal symbol of freedom. Still in Chapter 6, after everyone turned in their essays, Mrs. Hansen announced that Richard would play the role of the doughboy. He read his essay out loud in the class, and almost everyone clapped after he was done, except Harry and Abner, the bullies. Then Mrs. Hansen announced that Hannah would play Lady Liberty. Everyone gasped. Hannah read the essay out loud, looking nervous. She focused on the need for everyone in Turtle Lake to care about each other, no matter the differences between them. After Hannah finished reading, Richard was the only one who clapped for her. Chapter 7. Richard noticed that some students wanted to clap for Hannah too, but Harry, Abner and Peggy were sitting with their arms crossed, scaring the other students from clapping. The next morning, everyone at school was angry, discussing Mrs. Hansen's choice for Lady Liberty. There were even some angry parents that came to visit the principal's office. In class, Mrs. Hansen announced that Hannah had declined the role of Lady Liberty. Several students were angry about the announcement. At lunch break, Richard asked Hannah why she declined the role. She replied that she didn't want to start a war in Turtle Lake. It would be the best for everyone if she gave the role to someone else. Richard stood by Hannah and said that he would decline the doughboy role too. Richard and Hannah went to see Mrs. Hansen to tell her about Richard's decision. Mrs. Hansen was no longer ashamed of being American because of her two fine students. Chapter 7. Richard walked Hannah home that afternoon and he had never felt happier. Making Hannah feel better made him feel wonderful. The next day at school, Millie and Herbie had been chosen to play Lady Liberty and doughboy. It didn't turn out to be a popular contest. Fairness had still won. During lunch break, Hannah invited Richard to supper with her parents. Richard said yes. Richard told his brother he won't be home for dinner. After school, Richard walked with Hannah back to her house. He met her parents there, who were warm and friendly to him. While waiting for dinner, Mr. Schirmer chatted with Richard about poetry. During dinner, Mr. and Mrs. Schirmer discussed many interesting things about their life. After dinner and dessert, everyone went to the parlor to listen to music. When dusk arrived, Richard was sad to leave but happy because Hannah's parents said he was always welcome. So parlour. Parlour is a sitting room. Chapter 8. Richard's father chatted with Richard about his decision to not be in the play. His father lectured him about siding with the Shermans and how that meant he wasn't standing with the other people in the town. Richard's father said that Richard's poetry was filling his mind with foolish ideas. Richard became sad after hearing this. As fall continued, Richard was still unpopular with the other students, but becoming closer to Hannah. He was also invited to the Shermans' house often. In January, Richard received a sad letter from Mr. Kilmer. He wrote about missing his family and being gloomy. Hannah's family decided to send him a care package to cheer him up. Mr. Kilmer wrote back later that the package made him very happy. Care package. It is a parcel of food, money or luxury items sent to a loved one who is away from home for an extended period. Chapter 8. In spring, Richard's history teacher taught the class about the battles that were happening. The small hope everyone had was in President Wilson's peace plan, which was to build a League of Nations. In late May, the war news suddenly got much better. Everyone was in a great mood, just in time for the end-of-term picnic. The students walked to a nearby meadow, while Richard and Hannah sat under a large elm tree and ate together. He asked Hannah to tell him about New York. Richard and Hannah suddenly got upset thinking about the war. Richard decided to carve his and her initials in the tree, when Hannah suddenly got hit in the ankle by a stone with the word hunt on it. Meadow is an open habitat or field vegetated by grass, herbs and other non-woody plants. To carve initials means to cut using a knife into the surface. Here it will be the arm tree. So initials will be the first letter of the name. Richard will be R and Hannah will be H. Chapter 9. Richard and his father were cleaning the barn when Gus came to announce that he had enlisted in the army. This upset Pa very much, and he scolded Gus before leaving angrily. When Gus tried to say goodbye to Pa, Pa didn't respond. Gus left quietly and Richard was scared of never seeing his brother again. Richard and Angie discussed Pa's bitter mood these days, and Angie said he was worried about Gus. Between working at the farm, Richard spent time with the Shermans often to distract him from his family problems. He also continued to work on poems. After receiving a letter from Mr. Kilmer and responding immediately, Richard received the sad news from Hannah that Mr. Kilmer had been killed in battle. Chapter 10. The Shermans gave him a copy of the newspaper and Richard read the story of how Mr. Kilmer passed away. He hastily thanked the Shermans and quickly ran to somewhere he could cry by himself. He went home and wrote a poem titled In Memory of Sergeant Joyce Kilmer. After sharing the poem with the Shermans, they encouraged him to take it to the newspaper office to be printed and shared with everyone in Turtle Lake. On Thursday, the poem was printed in the newspaper. Pa called out to Richard and finally told him the story of his brother who passed away in battle, Roland. After reading the poem and seeing Pa's reaction, both Pa and Richard finally understood why Richard wrote poems. Chapter 10. The war finally ended. Richard and his family laughed about Gus being in the army for a long time, but were very thankful the danger was over. Hannah's brother Otto also returned from the war. As winter came closer, Richard divided his time between school, the farm, and spending time with the Shermans, especially Hannah. Richard's poetry could be regularly seen in the newspaper, and since it was usually about farm life, Pa helped Richard to make the poems better, and sometimes Pa just smiled and said it was a good poem. Thank you. We have just finished a lesson on the literature component, which is a novel, and the title is Dear Mr. Kilmer. I hope you have benefited from this video, and then do subscribe to my channel. It is called Educator OmniTube. I'm Teacher Gan, so signing off. Bye bye.